Good afternoon. How are you? Are you tired? Are you sure? Okay. IoT without barriers, building a strong ecosystem. First, a little bit about myself. So, my name is Rami Avidan. I live in the lovely city of Stockholm. But I work in Bonn for Deutsche Telekom. And my history is that I've been in IoT for close to 20 years now. I founded a business called Wireless, whom a couple of years ago was acquired by Core in the US. Later I co-founded the IoT business at Tele2, and since April I'm lucky enough to be the SVP of IoT for Deutsche Telekom. And so what one can say is that I know very little about anything else than specifically IoT. But in IoT, I do have deep, deep knowledge. So this session today is going to be somewhat of an interactive session. I'm going to start talking a little bit about some of the barriers that we're seeing and some of the activities that we think that we have to do as an ecosystem to overcome some of those barriers. But then I would like to have a discussion to get your feedback, your thoughts, your ideas of what it is that we plan to do as Deutsche Telekom. Sounds good? That's when you all say, fantastic. Okay. Told you you're tired. I will warm you up, don't worry. Okay, so look, most of you, I guess, have been engaged in IoT for some time and you know what it is. In essence, the way we at DT look at IoT, it's really about optimization, okay? The customers that are deploying these types of technologies are looking to, in one way or another, optimize their business. Of course, it stems from the fact that many years ago, when we started talking about the concept of IoT, and it obviously wasn't called IoT or M2M, really customers looked at it as a means to improve their cost infrastructure. But today, of course, as the evolution has taken place, not only in the ecosystem and in the technologies, but in the way that the customers look at these different aspects of IoT, we can now optimize the entirety of our businesses. We can move into new business models. We can change the perception of ourselves in the market. We can engage with our customers differently. Of course, we can continue to optimize our own cost infrastructure as a business, but there are many, many more use cases. But in essence, it is about optimization. This is at the heart of what IoT does. And I think one of the biggest problems that we as the ecosystem players, and I would consider most of us in this room today as ecosystem players, we are more focused on the technologies. Specifically the technologies that we ourselves have developed or that we are taking to market. Now, of course, we have that interest because we want to monetize somewhere. We want to be able to monetize all of that IP and the investment that we've done over time. And of course, that drives us to engage our customers in a very technocratic discussion, where the essence should be about having a value accretive discussion with the customer. Talking about what are the strategic directions that those players want to take with their businesses. What is it that they will want to fundamentally change? And this is very complex, right? Moving from having a very sales focus on technology, selling technologies, to now having to speak to the customers about their pain points. More of the solution sale. And I think many of us in this room are going through that shift right now from understanding that it's not enough to only talk about the technologies. We have to talk about the value that the technologies are actually fundamentally delivering to the customers. So, you know, when you're a customer, typically this is how it looks. My team calls this the wall of desperation. And I think it's enough for all of you to walk around the show here How many platforms are there? How many IoT platforms? And you know, DT is no better, right? When I came to DT, and I'm still counting, you know, we've got more than 20 different IoT-related platforms. Now, how do you sell that? Now, more importantly, how do you buy that as a customer? Where do I start? Right? It is super, super complex. And then, of course, this landscape is not, it's not static. It's dynamic. Customers are constantly pivoting themselves, and of course, the ecosystems players, they're also pivoting. They're being bought up, or they go into bankruptcy, right? Or they're simply closed down, or the technology has changed, and they have to migrate the customers that they have onboarded. You know, it is a very, very dynamic landscape. And this, of course, if you're now a BMW or a Daimler or a Volvo, you know, just take that automotive segment for a second. And you think about them wanting to engage with this very fluid landscape. It is super, super complex, right? And this is one of the biggest barriers that we have to try to overcome. And I'm not suggesting that we should take away all these players or tell them not to sell their businesses, but we have to think differently about how we interact. And I'll come to some very specific aspects of this in just a couple of minutes. Does this make sense to you so far? Okay, some of you are nodding. Some of you are still thinking, okay, what's the point? Where is he taking us? I'm getting there. Have patience. So, in essence, if you walk around the floor of this exhibition today, basically what you're seeing is every single player trying to find their position. Most of the players do a little bit of everything. Some are niched, but the big players are really trying to position themselves as a one-stop shop. Now, for those of you that have been in this industry for a really long time, you know that there is no such thing as a one-stop shop in IoT. There isn't. Nobody in their own right can deliver an end-to-end solution in IoT. Why? Simply because there's so many components that goes into delivering an end-to-end solution in IoT. There is a chipset, there is a module, there is a device, there is some sort of connectivity, there is some sort of cloud and infrastructure, data management, analytics, integration. The list goes on and on and on, right? And so what is happening now is that companies are trying to figure out, the ecosystem players are trying to figure out, what is my position? How am I going to be able to position myself in the ecosystem and to be able to then translate my position in the ecosystem to value creation for the customers? This is why it is such a dynamic landscape, because we're doing trial and error. And I'm not necessarily advocating that trial and error is wrong. What I am advocating is that we have to understand the complexity that we are posing on our customers when we act as an ecosystem like we are. Okay? So, some of the barriers then, right? You know, if you then think about what does this wall of desperation and this very dynamic ecosystem environment create for our customers? Well, there are many more barriers than these, but these are some of the more important barriers. Okay? First of all, if you walk around here, and of course this is not the entire ecosystem by far that you're seeing at this show, but it's a big portion of it. A lot of it is about proprietary technologies, where the lack of interoperability is very low. And even when we say that, yes, we are using standard translators and it will work flawlessly and everything is going to flow, no problem, the truth of the situation is we're simply not there. Why? Because many moons ago, when we started engaging in this industry, we did not agree on standards. There is a lot of work around standardization as we speak, and if there is one big thing that I'm a proponent of, it is about standardization. Driving a universal, adopted framework that we can all adhere to. It is going to massively reduce the barriers of adopting IoT as technology and ultimately getting into the value creation for our customers and ultimately to ourselves. So I think standardization to combat interoperability problems is super, super important. Of course, the lack of interoperability also reduces automation. And of course, anybody that has been engaged in actually deploying IoT solutions, you know that it's actually not only the deployment of the technology that is of importance, it is about the lifetime of that asset sitting somewhere in the world. It is the total cost of ownership that is going to ultimately create value or not to that customer using that asset, right? So when we talk about automation, of course, if the systems are really not interoperable, we're obviously not going to reach the level of automation that is required to drive down the cost dramatically in the various integrations within this IoT cycle. And of course, what customers are really looking for is ease of use. Really what a customer is looking for is being able to deploy an asset and it's automatically provisioned all the way through and actually generating data that you can take decisions on, preferably actually automating the decision making through a variety of different systems, right? So obviously, ease of use is really what the customer is looking for, to be able to deploy more and more use cases as they grow their own business. For us now to scale this business, this is going to be fundamental going forward. Now, if you're, again, an automotive manufacturer, right, and you are faced with that wall of desperation, what is your biggest fear? You know, when you build a car, you typically plan for many, many, many years. It's a long cycle of R&D activities before you actually get to building a vehicle, before you actually get to selling it, and then of course the car is used for several years in the markets, right? So when you choose your technologies and your partners, you have to think about that longevity that you have from an R&D, production, deployment, and use perspective. So of course, when they now look at new technologies that are being rolled out, if I just look at the telco space, where we're now shutting down 2G networks all around the world, let's open up the floor. How many knows in the public today, if you look at a global space, how many of the connected 3GPP assets, the percentage that is still on 2G, anybody dares to have a guess? That's not far off actually. 80 is not a bad number. I would venture to say that it's probably around 60%. And now we're shutting off the network. Now, some of those deployments will have 3G capabilities, perhaps, on the module side, so maybe they can, but we're shutting 3G down as well. So think about the complexity when there is a new technology coming. Think about the longevity. You know, the average lifetime of an IoT asset in the market today is 7 to 8 years. Disregarding of what vertical, the average of the average. So some of you will say, well, actually it's 8.5. Well, my point is, the assets are living out there for a really long time. And going back to the TCO, imagine if we constantly change the technology infrastructure, the architecture itself, it's going to fundamentally kill the business case for our customers, right? So what they're really looking for is the ability to have flexibility. Flexibility of being able to exchange out technology components that are now redundant or legacy, okay? And you know, the pace of our evolution of technology, of course, all the new technologies are cheaper, better, faster, nicer, sexier, all of that kind of stuff, right? So of course, customers are getting drawn into that as well. And especially if I just look at the telco side, you know, what are we doing on 5G now, right? We're marketing that like it's the best thing since sliced bread. I happen to believe that long-term 5G will be fantastic, but it's going to take time before we get there, right? But the customers are looking for flexibility, the flexibility to be able to adopt new technologies as they become available. And the final thing, which I think is super important, which I believe we're starting to now talk about, is business models. we have all, as ecosystem players, in the past been very focused on selling our solutions with our business models. But of course, if you're a customer or another partner is trying to stitch together solutions to create an end solution to a customer, what you have to do, not only do you have to create interoperability and harmony in a very unpredictable stack of technologies, you also have a plethora of different business models. Some are rev share, some are cost, some are pay as you, some, license models, perpetual, We have to also think about standardization around the business models. Now that doesn't mean that I'm going to be totalitarian here and say, this is the only business model that we're going to deploy. What I am talking about is we have to understand the financial, the commercial complexity of trying to marry together a variety of different business models to create one business model. And we have to be very conscious and humble ahead of that and try to help our customers and our partners engage in that landscape. Now, if I talk about this more from a telco perspective, because of course I'm here representing Deutsche Telekom, not only talking about IoT in general, from a telco perspective, typically, the telcos have looked at this from two different angles: the horizontal angle and the vertical angle. And the horizontal angle is really very simple. I build a stack of horizontal technologies. I don't necessarily build the end-to-end solution. I have a stack that can be built into other stacks, and that way I sell my capabilities. Typically, it's been very much end-to-end, right? Some sort of connectivity management platform with a SIM card. You bundle that together, and that can be integrated into something that, at the end of the day, can connect up and deliver data points, right? And then, of course, the flip side to that is that some operators, telcos, have taken the position that, you know what? It's not enough for us to only play in the connectivity space. We don't want to become the dumb pipe. So what have they gone out and done? They've built vertical solutions. Now, anybody that play in the vertical space, you will know that as soon as you go into the vertical space, you have to fundamentally shift your sales approach. You have to have a much more of a consultative sales approach. More importantly, the competitive landscape is significantly different. If you're a telco in any given market, if you're in Europe, there are 3-4 very large competitors in your own home market. Going to the vertical space, you're talking about hundreds of competitors. Startups, scale-ups, as well as the very large companies trying to compete in that specific vertical, right? So I would venture to argue that there are very few telco players that have been successful in deploying the vertical use case. Some have been successful in the horizontal use case, and some, very few, I would argue, in the vertical use case. Then, of course, there is the third model, called the diagonal approach. Now, what is the diagonal approach? The diagonal approach is basically where you build a horizontal stack of solutions, where you build an ecosystem of partners that allows you to drive your horizontal stack of technologies towards your ecosystem, to allow for them to build their end-to-end solution on your stack, but where you yourself showcase the capabilities of a horizontal stack through what is called your accelerators, okay? This is not to be sold massively. This is to make the horizontal stack come alive. And here and behold, of course, this is now the new direction that DT is taking, right? So, since I joined DT in April of this year, we've done a lot of strategy work internally. Trying to figure out what has worked well for us in the past. How do we now tackle some of these very large barriers that we're seeing for mass adoption? And how do we position ourselves to be able to be a fundamental part of that scale that we are sure will come at one point in time? Okay? And for us, this is the diagonal approach. And what that in essence means is that we are busy architecting right now our infrastructure. It is going to be very much a horizontal stack of technologies. Okay? So think about a plethora of connectivity services. So not only 3GPP focused, right? Being able to cater to BLE, Wi-Fi, and whatever else the customer may require. But being able then to manage that data, that all of those assets are generating in the architecture. Okay? But at the same time, building a very large ecosystem of partners that can build the end-to-end solution on the capabilities that we bring to the table. And marrying that with very innovative business models that allows our partners not to consume the risk, but actually where we share the risk together. So much more of revenue share models, freemium to premium models, where we actually allow our partners and customers to create the value before they have a huge cost structure given to them to be able to start deploying these type of technologies. Okay? So basically where we're taking this is that we are taking much more of an agnostic position, where we will want to be able to connect up any type of barrier service, use any type of platform, where we are the agnostic hub that allows customers the freedom to pick and choose technologies, where we reduce the barriers of deployment, of allowing provisioning to happen in one architecture, where we try to help our customers to simplify the various business models that are so complex in the market today. Now, more importantly for our partners, what we are going to try to do here is really, A, not to compete with them, but B, go to market together. So think about the architecture, right? This architecture is going to consist of DT technologies, but also partner technologies that we together marry to create solutions for our customers that our partners then ultimately are taking to our customers. Okay, so this is a fundamental shift in how we as DT has been positioned in the past, but we truly believe that that is the right modus of operandi when you're a telco like DT in IoT. Now, we are, as I said, very busy building. And early on in spring, let me not say MWC, just not to lock myself down, but early on in the spring, we are going to showcase our new capabilities. And we're truly excited about that at the moment, actually. So I don't know how many of you saw the press release that went out this morning with Qualcomm. Any show of hands? Of course, the DT crew has seen it. Sure, thank you. That's good. Anybody else? No show of hands. Really? Okay. What we announced with Qualcomm this morning is that Qualcomm has adopted our new SIM architecture. How many of you have heard about our new SIM? Okay. So there are some show of hands. That's good stuff. New SIM is basically our soft SIM infrastructure. It's a methodology of how you can actually deploy 3GPP capabilities without having to have the physical SIM card. And there's a lot of very interesting capabilities that comes from that. But more importantly, for the customer, it creates real value in being able to provision easier, being able to reduce the BOM cost dramatically, but more importantly, being able to optimize the whole logistics of deployment of connected assets, right? So it's truly a great leap ahead. And if you haven't read the press release, you should definitely go and read it. But these are some of the things that we will be showcasing as part of the DT IoT Hub earlier on in the spring. So stay tuned for that for sure. Now, I obviously have to brag a little bit about some of our customers and partners that we are engaging with, right? I mean, obviously, all of you have known DT for a long time, right? We have been in this business for a long time, and obviously we do a lot of business with a lot of the large players out there. You should stay tuned for tomorrow morning. There will be a very large announcement with Siemens for the industrial space that we are getting engaged in. And obviously you also know that we're doing some fundamental things with BMW, where we're basically connecting up all of the BMW fleets of cars around the world with a lot of other OEMs as well, right? And so of course, we would really love to know how we can enable you. So we have obviously our booth here. We would love for you to come and speak to us. Talk about your requirements, your thoughts, your ideas, and engage with us to understand how we could do more business together. And so with that, thank you. But I would like to open up the floor for some questions and discussions. We do have a few more minutes. So, do we have, and I think we have some ladies with microphones over here, right? So do we have any questions, any comments, any thoughts? Good, bad, right idea of DT? We're taking the right steps? I don't understand what the hell he was talking about. Do we have any questions? Really? So it's crystal clear. Basically, where do you sign up? No brave questions. There is a brave question in the head. Okay.
Hello. Yeah. So I'm wondering if you're offering a platform, for example, to connect devices to, and you're offering connectivity, how does it work in terms of sort of interoperability, where customers don't want to be, let's say, fully dependent on just one player to offer everything, but can sort of mix and match in different use cases?
So, are you asking a question from a business model perspective or from a technology perspective?
From a business model perspective.
Okay. So, first of all, what I would suggest the customers to do is actually to build their architecture and not to have multiple architectures. Because of course, if you look at most of the customers today, the way that they've gotten engaged in IoT has been on use cases. And those use cases have been very siloed, okay? Which basically means that you don't get scale and you don't leverage the investments that you've done in another area into a third area, okay? So my first comment would be, try to minimize the number of different architectures that you have. Now, the way to do that is to think about engaging with players that allow you to buy into an architecture where you can scale, where you are not locked into a specific set of technologies, but that you can actually add pieces of technologies as you want to grow into new type of use cases. And the same goes for the business model, right? You have to be very crisp and clear with yourself from a strategic perspective. What is it that I will want to actually deliver on? And then you have to work yourself backwards to determine what kind of business models do I need to not only sell at, but also buy at, right? So you have to marry the two. And it's a complex thing, right? So you have to really put some elbow grease around your thinking there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Some more questions out here? Now you're getting warmed up. You always need somebody to...
Hi. With regard to your portfolio of solutions you just explained, which are the ones that have the highest traction right now?
So obviously we're a connectivity player, right? So obviously we do massive amounts of what I would refer to as pure end-to-end. But we're also getting traction on our Cloud of Things platform, which is our AEP in a partnership with Software AG. So we're doing a lot of very interesting things there. I don't know if you saw the announcement we did a couple of months ago with ISS on the building automation side of things. So I think that is really getting traction. And then of course the third one that I think is really interesting is this new SIM, where we're getting tremendous traction from the whole module and chip side of our ecosystem and actually adopting our architecture as the soft SIM driver in the industry. So I think those are sort of the low-hanging fruit. I would argue the next step is our analytics engine called DIH, the Data Intelligence Hub. You should stay tuned. We're making some really interesting announcements in that space shortly.
Hi, good morning. Just a question around your soft SIM or eSIM, maybe just for my own understanding. If I have sensors that works on BLE mainly, how easy would it be to, because obviously if you add a SIM card to it, especially if they're wireless, you need battery power and they become very bulky. Will eSIM solve that problem, that I can switch BLE to SIM technology?
Well, first of all, if the hardware has the capability to do it, one of the key drivers for us developing new SIM and the architecture around it is exactly the energy consumption. It came from internal R&D when we looked at the NB-IoT infrastructure. And one of the drivers around NB-IoT, of course, is the energy consumption. And so new SIM has been architected to consume very little energy, right? So of course, as you think about your solutions, that is only one component out of many that are consuming the energy of that solution. But we're, of course, extremely focused on that. And the new SIM is specifically designed for low energy consumption. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you. One last question. There are some in the back there. And there is one there as well, and there, and okay.
Hi. So you were talking about standardization. My question here would be, what would be your steps introducing this standardization, and also regarding the business value and the business model approaches? How would you go with this standardization into that? Thank you.
Very good question. Thank you. Look, I think standardization is complex, first of all, right? Especially in an industry like IoT that is not a telco industry. The telco players are only a component of it, right? And although there are some IoT consortium out there, there isn't a governing body dictating exactly how we should do certain things. So the way I think we should do it is have a variety of different players coming together. And up until now, those have been very much vertically focused. So there are industrial IoT consortium, and there are automotive consortium, and there are white goods consortium and whatnot. What we need to do is marry these various consortiums together and agree on a couple of areas where we believe the highest order of priority is where we need to start from a standardization perspective. Of course, there are a couple of dimensions there, right? The way that we interact with the various assets, right? What language should we be using? How should it be actually interoperable? We have other aspects like security and data privacy, which are at the forefront of everybody's minds, right? So I think we need to bring some of those consortiums together, agree on order of prioritization, and act accordingly. When it comes to the business models, that's a much longer answer, and happy to share that with you later. But guys, thank you very much for being here with me today. I've really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope to interact with all of you here at the show. Please stop by our booth. Thank you so much.